Okay, I'll just wait like 1 or 2 more minutes just for others to hop on since it's still before 6.
Hello,
Good evening.
how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Great.
Okay. All right, well, I think we can get started and others can filter in as they do, but thank you all for joining us here for the open call information session for the City of Norwich Downtown Revitalization Initiative. I'm just gonna get my screen up here too. But my name is Samantha Aldrich. I work for Bergman, which is the consultant that was selected by the state to assist the City of Norwich with the facilitation of the overall DRI process. So what we're tasked with is helping to facilitate public engagement throughout the process, as well as help to evaluate and flush out various projects that come through, whether they were in the original Norwich DRI application or come through this open call for proposals. Just a quick overview of what we'll be covering tonight. So we'll be going through an introduction to the open call for proposals, and we'll just be going through eligibility and evaluation criteria for the projects through the DRI program, as well as walk everyone through how to submit an application for consideration. And exactly what is entailed in the application form itself. So we'll go through all of the application form elements to make sure everyone understands how to fill it out and maybe just relation to what details we are looking for. And then we'll just close out with a Q&A session. If you do have comments and questions during the presentation, you can use the chat feature at any time. So we will be looping back at the end of the presentation for to answer any questions or comments that come in. But after the presentation, we will be holding time to have you ask questions verbally if you do need to. So we're asking that comments be limited to 3 minutes per person and ask people to be respectful of others as well as the project team. But the way that we will do that is we'll have everyone on Zoom raise their hand via the Zoom controls, and we'll call on individuals one by one to ask questions as needed. And then at any time, if you do have questions or comments, whether it be during the presentation or after the presentation, after looking through the open call for proposals document, we do have a norwichdri.com webpage that you can visit. This hosts all information DRI. We'll be posting deliverables as they become available, and there's also a comment form that you can fill out, and those get submitted directly to our project team. So we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So what is the open call? Well, just from a big picture perspective, just wanted to make sure everyone knows what the DRI program is and why we're here tonight. But this is the 5th round of funding for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative program that the state has awarded. And this year, Norwich was lucky enough to be this year's winner in the Southern Tier region. So what this means is that $10 million in state funding is awarded to Norwich to implement multiple projects that are really intended to be transformative in the downtown. Out of this $10 million, $300,000 of it is used by our consultant team. And we also have a team of sub-consultants working with us. And really this is intended to develop a strategic investment plan overall encompassing the vision, goals, and objectives of the downtown Norwich area, as well as a listing and description of all of the projects that are recommended by the local planning committee to submit to the state. And from there, the state will select from that list which projects will be funded. and that will, and then the rest of the $9.7 million will be used to implement those projects. So how are projects identified? So the city, in order to get the funding, had to put together an application to the state. And in this application, there was a slate of projects identified. And it does include a myriad of projects, including streetscape improvements, parking lot enhancements, wayfinding signage, park enhancements, and as well as a few private development projects that are intended to be catalytic for the downtown. So these will all be reviewed by the local planning committee to assess their eligibility, as well as their applicability and whether the LPC would like to include them in the strategic investment plan. And that's actually a good point to make, is that all the projects within the city's original DRI application are not guaranteed for funding. So all of the projects within there will be vetted by the LPC as well as the community to determine if they make sense and meet the goals of downtown Norwich. So the second step of this process, and why we're here today, is because the local planning committee has decided to open up an open call for proposals. So when the city and its partners were putting together the application, there's a chance that they didn't know about some property owners or business owners within downtown that might have really great projects ideas or projects that are currently in development and meet all of the eligibility requirements of the DRI. So this is a chance for community members to submit project proposals if they have them, and be ready for the local planning committee to review these projects. And then we just also have listed here that even if you do submit a project and it does become go before the LPC for review, it's also just important to note that all the projects submitted will also not necessarily guarantee inclusion in the strategic investment plan. And then lastly here on the screen is just about the strategic investment plan itself. So as I mentioned, the LPC will be selecting projects from the total pool of applications, whether they were in the original DRI application or they come through this open call. And the LPC will be weighing and evaluating projects based on the eligibility criteria that we'll be going through here tonight. Within the strategic investment plan, so there is $9.7 million of funding to be utilized for project implementation. And it will be the intention of the LPC to submit between $12 and $15 million worth of projects to the state. So it's more requesting more DRI funding than is available, but this is really intended to ensure that there are additional projects that the LPC and community are happy with being implemented. If a project were to fall through, there's another project to choose from on that list. Okay, so just again to kind of go through the purpose of the open call, really to provide an opportunity for community members to submit project proposals for the LPC to consider for inclusion in the strategic investment plan. So the submission for project proposals is open to the public. Proposals can be submitted by private and nonprofit entities, and all the public projects, there were a lot identified in the city's application to the state originally, and all of these were identified and will be submitted and reviewed by the LPC. The proposal form, which we will go through later on in this presentation, does just go through a listing of all of the general information that we need for review of the projects. So some of the fields that we'll be asking for include a description of your project, what's the preliminary cost estimate that you put together, and what are the potential benefits for implementation for downtown Norwich. Okay, so what constitutes an eligible project? So an eligible project, all of the eligibility criteria is listed here on the screen, and we're going to go through these one by one. But they essentially include, is the project a eligible project type? Is it located within the DRI boundary? What is the anticipated timing for implementation? What are the specific funding requirements? And funding requirements generally change but by the type of project sponsor. So is it a private project, or is it a project submitted by a nonprofit entity or public entity? And then within each of those eligible project types, there are project type specific requirements as well. There are two eligible project types for private and nonprofit entities to submit through the open call of proposals. So the first one here listed on the screen is new development, redevelopment, and rehabilitation of existing buildings or site improvements. So this generally can include the development or redevelopment of property within downtown Norwich. It could be for mixed use, commercial, or public uses, and this can also include site improvements on private property as well. So for example, if a property owner wanted to implement and install a public art display or complete parking lot enhancements, that's an eligible site improvement as well. There's also branding and marketing eligible project types, and these are generally projects that improve downtown wayfinding and help to just really foster that sense of place in the downtown. But it's important to note here that these are intended to be one-time expenses, such as the development of materials or installation of wayfinding signage, and not intended to be really routine costs or costs for a downtown or web page or something to that effect. So these are costs that are seen and are intended to be one-time expenses. Then you'll also see here we have on the right-hand side public improvement projects. And these are capital projects that improve the public realm. Within the city's application to the state, there was a listing of public realm enhancements, including streetscape improvements, park enhancements, things of that nature. So the cities and its partners will be responsible for projects within the public realm, and this slate of projects has already been identified. However, if you do have an idea for a public project, we would encourage you to submit that project idea via our norwichdri.com webpage. If you do have a project for a public improvement project, we would ask that you don't submit an application form. We're happy to hear what your ideas for public improvements are, and we could bring them up to the city to see if they're interested in pursuing that project within the public realm. There are also ineligible activities for DRI funding. So ineligible project types include planning activities such as master plans or feasibility studies, operations and maintenance such as staff salaries, rent, and property maintenance. And as I mentioned, this is because DRI funds are not intended to be for routine or one-time or ongoing costs. Pre-award costs are ineligible for DRI funding. So these would be costs that are incurred prior to receiving the individual DRI grants, which are hopefully slated to be announced in fall 2022 after the submission of the strategic investment plan. Property acquisition is also not an eligible DRI cost or activity, excuse me. And then expenses related to training and other programs, as well as expenses related to existing programs, are also ineligible. And I will note here that these types of activities can be included within the overall total project cost. However, they just must be covered by other sources of funding and not proposed for DRI funding. For location, so proposed projects that come through the open call must be located within the Norwich DRI boundary, which is seen here on the right side of the screen. And a larger map is also included in that open call for proposals document as well. I'll note here that the LPC may be considering minor adjustments to the boundary as DRI proposals come in. But we do really stress that, just throughout the DRI program, the boundary is intended to be very compact and walkable. So the LPC will consider minor adjustments, but within your application, if it is outside of the boundary, we would just ask that you provide justification for why your project should be included and maybe why the DRI boundary would be expanded if it were approved. Timing is also really important. For proposed projects, they must be ready to break ground within 2 years of receiving that DRI grant funding. And this is to ensure that projects are well developed and primed for implementation. So as I mentioned, our team will be submitting the entire slate of recommended projects to the state within the strategic investment plan in July of this year. After that plan is submitted to the state will review all of those projects and select from the list for DRI awards. We are anticipating that timeframe be fall of 2022. However, this may change. It's just based on, this timeline is based on really the past DRI rounds that have been funded. And then hopefully right from announcement of the awards, contracting can get underway fairly quickly. And from fall 2022, between fall 2022 and fall 2024, that could be the time for potential project implementation. But just wanted to stress here that project readiness is really important, and these projects should be ready to be implemented within the near term. Funding requirements. So this is also an important eligibility criteria to note, and new to the program this year, that no DRI awards less than $100,000 to any project will be made, whether they are privately sponsored, publicly sponsored, or sponsored by a nonprofit entity. And as I've mentioned previous to this, it's really to ensure that projects are of a significant size and are very transformative and catalytic in all the downtown communities, especially downtown Norwich. So in terms of match requirements and just funding requirements in general, there are differing match requirements for privately sponsored projects compared to nonprofit entities and public sponsors. So for privately sponsored projects in general, the DRI will not cover 40%, more than 40% of the total project cost, meaning that 60% will be needed to be covered by privately sponsored funds. The minimum total project cost for a privately sponsored project with the minimum of $100,000 would then be $250,000. And this also comes with a little bit of a caveat, is that NYSERDA is also going to be a state agency partner within the DRI fund this round. And if projects do meet sustainability and energy efficiency standards this year, so if a project does include on-site renewables, energy storage, or electrical vehicle charging equipment, and there's others that are on that list too, but if it does meet that sustainability criteria, then privately sponsored projects could be eligible for up to 50% of funding. So you'll kind of see the project example budgets on the right-hand side of the screen here. So just a base project, privately sponsored, with no sustainability criteria or energy efficiency. The minimum DRI request of $100,000 with the 60% private match of $150,000 would mean a total minimum project cost of $250,000. And then you'll also see below the example project budget for those projects that meet sustainability criteria. So because they would be eligible for up to 50% match, the minimum total project cost for those types of projects would be $200,000. I'll also mention here too that for the private match, something that the state does like to see, and you can cover by your 60% private match, is leveraging other sources of funding. So if, for example, say you had received funding through the consolidated funding application for a specific element of your project, you can use that funding for your private match. I'll also mention here too that all of the DRI grants that are awarded are reimbursable. So this would mean that if you were awarded DRI funding, you would need to expend all of the costs and you would be reimbursed for those incurred costs. So typically this means that sponsors will need to secure some type of gap financing to cover those costs before they are reimbursed. Now, the eligibility criteria for public and nonprofitly sponsored projects is a little bit different. So we mentioned that the minimum DRI project cost or DRI funding is $100,000. So the DRI can fund up to 100% of private and nonprofit projects. So this would mean that the minimum project cost for public and nonprofit projects is at least $100,000. Obviously, if a public and nonprofit entity does have a match to provide for DRI funds, that would make the project more competitive. And the LPC would be reviewing that when they are looking at the total slate of projects. So the example project budget, if the DRI, or excuse me, if the total project cost was $100,000, but that nonprofit or public agency did have a 25% match, the minimum DRI request that they would be asking for would be $75,000. Okay. So there's also eligibility criteria for specific project types. So as I mentioned, there's the new development or redevelopment or rehabilitation of existing buildings. So with those types of projects, the projects would be required to meet the New York State Stretch Energy Code. And this would be required whether or not the municipality has adopted that code locally. This is something that our team can help with to ensure that the energy code is being met by those projects. And then another important thing to note for new development or redevelopment projects, for projects that are fully residential, they must have at least 8 units and include an affordable component. And that affordable component is not necessarily written in stone. It's something that will be reviewed and assessed by the local planning committee. So just wanted to kind of just make that known that it will need to include some type of affordable component, whether that be a percentage of those units as affordable. Site improvements, including public art or the renovation of so site improvements, site improvements could include public art or the renovation or creation of new outdoor spaces on private property. Okay, so the evaluation criteria, and our team will be using the evaluation criteria specifically to determine once they come through the open call for proposals, whether they are eligible for the DRI program. And we will also be sharing all the projects that come in with the LPC and basically walking them through the process of whether that project is eligible and also how to evaluate it against other projects. So we'll be going through this list of evaluation criteria one by one as well. But really that evaluation criteria includes, is it a project that's eligible under the DRI program? Does it align to both the state and the local downtown revitalization initiative goals? does the project have a catalytic effect and can help to spur additional investment within the downtown? Is the project ready for implementation? And does that project sponsor or the projects kind of have their ducks all in a row for implementation within the near term? Is the project cost effective and feasible? Does the project have any co-benefits, and what are those secondary benefits within the downtown? And does the project sponsor themselves have the capacity to both implement and sustain that project? So number one, your project must be one of the eligible project types. And so again, those project types are new development, redevelopment, and rehabilitation of existing buildings within the DRI boundary or site improvements. And then branding and marketing projects as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, projects must align with the DRI program goals, and these DRI program goals are consistent across the state, but the state is really focused on creating 24/7 vibrant and active downtown cores, and really helping to leverage assets that exist within downtown. So within Norwich itself, some of those assets include the amazing park space that's there, the museum district, and the historic properties that really create that overall sense of place. And how can you utilize those assets to really drive additional investment within Norwich? So really the goal of the overall DRI program is to identify additional projects to support things like job creation and diverse housing options to attract and retain residents, and that also help to grow the local tax base and things like that. So just overall, helping to expand downtown revitalization, increase economic activity, and promote sustainability are all equally important. Now, projects should also align with local downtown Norwich goals. So some visioning and goal setting was sort of put together with the Norwich DRI application that was submitted to the state originally. And also with some of this process, we will be doing some visioning and goal setting to kind of just refine those goals. But some of those goals really pertain to creating an inclusive, sustainable downtown environment, again, to attract residents, to attract young professionals, and also tourists and students to the downtown. Overall, enhance the public realm to create a welcoming and enjoyable experience for all types of visitors. Celebrate local assets, as I mentioned, the amazing historic buildings and park spaces that exist in downtown. Leverage existing projects and local partnerships, as well as just encourage meaningful private investment overall. In terms of catalytic potential, we are looking for projects that are catalytic in themselves and really help to attract other private and public investment within the downtown. So within the proposal, you will have to, sort of state what are your project benefits and why is your project catalytic, and why will it spur other investment within the downtown as well. Project readiness is, a critical component and something that the LPC will be heavily weighing when they're evaluating all of the projects. And as I mentioned, we're really looking for projects that are well developed and ready to be implemented within the near term. So this is a good opportunity to assess maybe where your project is at. Is your project more of a concept level, or is it a great idea? Or does it have some form of, is it in some sort of phase of development already? Do you have renderings already created or concept plans that are in development? Or, is it possible for you to really gather what those preliminary project costs are? So just wanted to reiterate that project readiness and everything is just very important in terms of what we are looking for when evaluating projects that come in through the open call. Cost effectiveness and feasibility is also something that the LPC will be weighing when looking through the applications. So does the project represent an effective and efficient investment of public DRI funds? And does it also leverage additional sources of public and private funding within the downtown? As I mentioned, just cost effectiveness and feasibility, it's just really important to understand those overall funding requirements that are expected, whether you are a privately sponsored project or have a public or nonprofit entity. So just keeping those funding requirements in mind when you're putting together your application will be really important. Co-benefits. So what are your secondary benefits to implementation? So not only will your project be implemented and be great for the downtown, but how does that sort of help to leverage additional investment within Norwich? Does your project help to generate additional economic activity or grow the local tax base? Does it overall help to improve quality of life for residents in downtown Norwich or improve the public realm? Looking for ways that you can really create a healthier, more comfortable and productive environment for all to live and work in downtown Norwich. So as part of the application, we will be asking applicants to really provide that justification for us and why your project would benefit downtown Norwich. And then lastly, the evaluation criteria for capacity. So this relates to does the applicant have the capacity to successfully facilitate implementation of the project? So does the applicant have the experience and resources to make the project a reality, so utilize the DRI funding to implement the project itself, but also after those DRI expenses are expended, does that project sponsor have the capacity to maintain that project over time? And will it be a permanent fixture within downtown Norwich? And again, help to kind of leverage additional investment. So I guess within this section here, when putting together the application, it'll be important to demonstrate past projects that you may have implemented or additional sources of funding that you may have for your project as well. Okay, so that is all for the evaluation criteria that the LPC will be using to evaluate projects that come in through the open call for proposals. But just in terms of overall requirements for DRI projects once they are funded, just some things to keep in mind that DRI awards are subject to the following requirements. So if a project is awarded by the state, each of those projects will sort of be filtered through various state agencies for contracting purposes. For example, ESD might take on private projects, or Department of State will take on more of those public side projects. And all of them do have varying requirements, but overall, the requirements that are consistent between all of them include minority and women-owned business enterprise goals. Typically, those are 30% of the cost for those types of enterprises, competitive procurement goals, as well as other state and local goals as well. And just something else to keep in mind for all of the projects that are awarded is that these are reimbursable grants. Can't stress that enough. So just wanted to kind of reiterate, that project sponsors may need to secure gap financing to implement their project. So once those project costs are incurred, then typically those funds will be reimbursed after implementation. Okay. So also in terms of submitting a proposal, we wanted to kind of go through how to submit a project proposal. So now that we sort of understand, what the eligibility and evaluation criteria are, how do you actually get an application? So there are two ways to get an application. One way would be to go to norwichdri.com to download a project proposal. Or you could go into Commerce Shenango on Broad Street or within City Hall well, not really in downtown, but in the city of Norwich to receive a hard copy of the open call for proposal. We would ask that you complete the form and address each question thoroughly and completely, because this will be the information that the local planning committee would be using to determine whether the project made sense to pursue further or not. And then once you fill out your form, there are three ways that you can submit it. Either you can submit it back online at norwichdri.com. There is a project upload button. You can submit it directly to me, and my email is listed there on the screen, or you can mail it to Commerce Shenango at 15 South Broad Street as well. I think the easiest way would either be to submit it online or by email, but if there are those that come in by mail, that is fine too. And other important thing to note is that all proposals we are asking to be due by March 18th at 4 p.m. So we understand that this is a quick deadline to kind of get everything together, but I think once people see what we're asking for in the open call for proposals submission form, they'll realize that the application isn't too hard to fill out, and hopefully all of the projects have the information that they need for us to be able to start the evaluation process. And at any time, if you need help or you're starting to fill out the application and don't know how to fill it out or don't understand a question or anything like that, we are always here to help. So you can contact me at any time. You can email me, or there's also a comment button on norwichdri.com. And like I said, those all get submitted to our project team, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. So what to expect next? So as I mentioned, all of the proposals will be due on March 18th. If you do have the application together before March 18th, then we would thoroughly appreciate you sending it in advance of that deadline if you do have all your information together. But if you don't, that's okay too, but that is the deadline we are using for this open call. And then over the next couple of weeks after the deadline, our team will be starting to sift through those applications and really looking to see which ones are eligible, which ones are not. And we will be reaching out to all of those applicants to set up meetings and determine if next steps are needed. In April, we will present all of the applications to the LPC for their review, and they will be considering which projects to pursue further. And then from April to July, really will be a prime time for the LPC to evaluate all those projects, and depending on the number of projects and the dollar amount for DRI requested funds, the LPC may have to eliminate some of those projects on the list. So it'll be a balance of which projects are, really support that vision for DRI Norwich, and maybe which ones don't support that overall investment and all of the criteria that we have gone through this evening. And then, as I mentioned, after the strategic investment plan gets submitted to the state in July, the state will be reviewing those applications and hopefully be announcing those individual project awards sometime in fall of 2022. Okay. So we wanted to go through a review of the proposal form itself, just so everybody is familiar with what is being asked and what fields they need to fill out. So this is really just a screenshot of the application. And I will mention that the application also goes through all of the eligibility and evaluation criteria that we went through too. So, and we will also be posting this presentation online as well. So you can always refer back to those criteria as well. But first on the list would be, who is submitting this application. So we are asking information about you and the applicant itself to really just provide your contact information. So typical information, name, address, phone, and email. That should be hopefully the easiest part of the form to fill out. And then where is your project located? So if you have an address or a brief description of where your project is located, whether it be in the DRI boundary. If it is just outside the DRI boundary, as I mentioned, LPC members will be considering minor boundary adjustments. So in this section, if it is outside of the DRI boundary, you would just need to provide justification about why you think this project would be important to include and revise that DRI boundary. The third question is about your project type. So on the application form, you'll be able to just click in a box which eligible project type you have. So whether that's new development, redevelopment, or rehabilitation of existing building or buildings, whether it's a site improvement or branding and marketing strategy. We also have a box related to come up with your project title and provide us a brief description of your project. So this would include describing the project's existing site conditions. If it's a building that you're proposing on, we would ask that you provide the entire building square footage, maybe the square footage of the portion of the building that you plan on renovating. How many floors is it? What's the acreage of the parcel? Describe how your project will positively impact downtown Norwich, and then describe what your specific project scope is. And we ask that you be pretty specific within the description as well. So for example, if you have a residential project or maybe a mixed use project, you would put in redevelopment of the first floor for commercial use and redevelopment of the upper stories into 40 units, 1 and 2 bedroom units, something to that effect. Number 5 is related to property ownership. So who owns the property, or if you are the project sponsor, but someone else owns the property, we would ask that you put that information as well. Typically, we would ask that you have the legal authority to execute contracts with the state and just in general oversee the project. Number 6 here on the screen just relates to responsible parties and partnerships. So this is the important opportunity to indicate if you have successfully completed similar projects or have a state funding grant to support your application. Really, this section relates to the capacity of the project sponsor to implement the project. And then typically with many projects, an applicant will work with specific partners to ensure the success of a project. So if you are working with a project partner, we would ask that you just describe and list their involvement here as well. All right, so maybe one of the more complicated portions of the application is related to the preliminary funding estimate that hopefully everyone has had a chance to put together. But here I would just reiterate that just pay careful attention to the specific funding requirements that the DRI program has set forth. And here you would list the various actions that are within your project. So for example, like design and engineering costs and specific construction costs or soft costs that you would like to include. And then we have a column for how much each of those items would cost, what is the funding source covering those costs? So are you requesting DRI funding for that portion of the total project cost, or do you have other sources of funding that would cover that specific line item? And then what is the status of those funds? So for example, if you were requesting DRI funding, you would put proposed DRI or proposed funding. Or if you secured a other grant or have fundraised dollars, you would, list that status of funds in there as well. And then overall here at the bottom is the total summary. So what is your total DRI funding request? What is the total funds you are providing from other sources, whether it be private or other funding sources? And then what is your total project cost? And then I'll just reiterate here again that these are reimbursable grants. So just keeping in mind that gap financing may be needed to complete these projects if they were funded. The timeline for implementation and project readiness, something that we stressed when we were going over the evaluation criteria. So again, the DRI is really looking for projects that are ready for implementation within the next 2 to 5 years. So we ask that you sort of sketch out a general implementation timeline for us, and what specific requirements will be needed to implement your project. Number 9 is related to anticipated revitalization benefits. So this is a chance to describe why your project should be considered by the LPC, why it's overall transformative and catalytic for downtown Norwich, and basically just providing the benefits that you think would be realized if your project were implemented. And then the last portion of the form is really just related to, it's a catch-all section. And if there was something else that you wanted to provide us, whether that be specific documentation, specific renderings of your project, and or other documents, including, property ownership and titles for properties, or maybe you have done a market study on a portion of your project, you can attach any information you think our project will need and the LPC will need to evaluate. And then again, that deadline for submission is March 18th at 4 p.m. And then just lastly, I will also like to stress this and underline it a million times, is if you are downloading the application from the norwichdri.com webpage, please download the application to your desktop before you start filling out the application online. If you start filling out the application in your browser, that information will not be saved, and you could potentially be losing all of the hard work that you have spent time on preparing for your application, and you also not be able to recover that information or submit it to our project team. So please make sure when you are downloading the application, it is downloaded and saved to your desktop before you start filling it out. And then again, you can submit it via email to me, saldrich@bergmanpc.com. You can submit it online at the norwichdri.com webpage, or you can also walk it in or mail it to Commerce Shenango. All right, so I know that was a lot of information, and I'm not sure if any comments or questions have come through the chat, but really just wanted to take this time to open it up for any questions or comments for those on the line. And then again, I would ask, if you do have a comment or question, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature, and we can call on individuals one by one to answer those questions.
Sam, the only question that came through, and I think I addressed it, but others might have a question, is you talked a little bit about the extension of the boundary, and just sort of reinforcing that that's only a parcel or two. I don't know if you want to go more into that, because I know you also said about on the application you can explain, but that was the question that came through the chat, was about that boundary change.
Yep, absolutely. So Yeah, just wanted to reiterate that, the boundary that is proposed as of right now for the Norwich DRI is very intentional and is intended to be walkable and compact. Now, the LPC will be considering minor adjustments. So obviously we will be bringing all of the projects that come forward, and the LPC will be reviewing all of those. If a project is a block or two outside of the boundary, the LPC may consider it. It's all up to their discretion, really. But we will not be making, or the LPC will not be making major adjustments to that boundary. So if you have questions as you're filling out the application and you want to send me an email with a description of where your project is, I can provide some further guidance, later this week or later next week as well. So please feel free to reach out to me if you do have specific questions.
And I think to reiterate that too, something that we've talked about is even if a project is outside of that boundary, there are a lot of other funding sources available. Empire State Development just reopened their CFA round. We work really closely with a lot of these. So, it's always a good idea to still do this because it's great for us to see what other projects might be out there. And maybe we can line you up with something that's not just the DRI. That's not the only bucket of money laying out there. So
that's
thanks,
a great
Sam.
point, Carrie. Thank you. And I will say for, project sponsors or applicants that want to submit an application and maybe aren't eligible, like Carrie said, we can always look at different sources of funding, and the CFA round is coming up through New York State. So there could be plenty of other sources to choose from as well. Okay. Preston Evans, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to take a chance to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having these sessions. They are very, very informative. I sat down, we're a nonprofit organization. I sat down with our chief executive and our chief operating officers today to kind of go over the application. And one question that I'm pretty sure I answered correctly, but I wanted to make sure that I did, is with regards to ineligible activities. There's a thing about expenses related to existing programs. If this is a project, it's like a full-scale renovation project to enhance an existing program, like a program's going to become, part of this new facility, that's still an eligible activity, right? Or an eligible project, because it's for the actual renovation, rebuilding of a building.
Yes, I think that could be included.
Okay. It's just, yeah, okay. And then, yeah, just to help supplement an existing program.
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sophia Hadid, do you have a question?
I do. Again, thank you for putting on this whole presentation. You've answered a lot of questions. It's very straightforward. It's very appreciated. I'm part of this meeting as a representative of the Eaton Center on Eaton Avenue. And I'm just curious as to who makes the determination as to who is awarded aspects of the grant.
Yes.
Like I understand that the DRI committee is responsible for going through it and determining and things, but I'm just curious as to who is, directly.
Yep. So as I mentioned, the local planning committee will be recommending a full slate of projects to the state. And so even though there's that $10 million of funding, the LPC will actually be recommending more than $10 million of funding for these projects that are on the ballot. Ultimately, the state does have the final decision in which projects are selected and funded. But as the committee is selecting their list of projects, essentially what that list of projects is saying is that the LPC is happy with any of these projects getting funded. So that, to answer your question, long story short, the state has the final say in which projects do end up getting funded.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
John, did you have a question?
I did. I wondered if you could give some clarification on the small amount of money for small local businesses. I know we have that $600,000 pot included in the 9.7, and I wondered if you could talk about if it's reimbursed. I know it's reimbursable, but what the percentage is and those kind of things, because it's something we haven't really touched on. Thank you.
Absolutely. So Didn't really discuss the small project grant fund tonight because typically that is a publicly or nonprofit sponsored project that would be submitted to the state. So within the city's application, they did identify the potential for a downtown fund. Typically, what that fund is up to $600,000 for smaller improvement projects for business owners, for property owners within the DRI. And what that would mean is if that project were funded, the $600,000 were awarded, basically the entity that applied for it. So in some cases, there may be a downtown entity such as a bid or Commerce Shenango that would be responsible for implementing and reviewing applications through that process. So I don't know if I'm answering that effectively, but essentially that would be something that once funded would be smaller applications would come in and be reviewed by another committee and be awarded on a case-by-case basis. And that is something that the LPC, once they look at the downtown fund, they can make recommendations for eligibility requirements, for funding requirements, and what the match percentages would be for those. So that's all kind of at the LPC's discretion to weigh in on. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, it does. I just didn't know if it was the 40% and 60, or if it's less or more, or, because if it's a project for 2,000 versus 20, the percentage could be different.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
it's also a lot less of an impact if it's not $1 million project, and that's a good thing because it's could help downtown.
Yep.
Yeah, John, this is Julie Sweet with the Department of State. I'm the project manager. We work in partnership with New York State Homes and Community Renewal, and they are the agency that oversees a fund if it's awarded to the community. And they will probably in the next meeting with the LPC share with them different ways to structure a fund and get input from the committee as to what they would prefer in terms of match requirements, types of projects that would be eligible, and so forth. But the key is that specific projects would not be identified for the fund as part of this strategic investment plan. There may be projects identified as potential candidates that would help demonstrate the demand for the fund and interest in it. But there would be a separate process if the fund were one of the projects that was awarded, there would be a separate application process, as Sam mentioned, later on after the fund is awarded, that would then solicit applications for the program with all of the specific requirements and eligibility requirements, match requirements, and so forth.
Thank you, Julie.
That was
Sam,
very
another,
helpful, Julie.
oh, sorry. Thanks, Julie. Another note that came up through the chat, just want to share, just want to mention that people have been asking about this reimbursable, how to do that, because some of these projects could be quite large. And I just wanted to note, one of our people here reminded me that, a lot of our local lending institutions are already aware of what is going on and have started to talk about ways they can be supportive of this project. So, most of our lending institutions, the, DCC that has a loan fund, there's a lot of them that have already started talking about ways that they can help support the community in their projects. So I don't want people to worry about the reimbursement part. So, you have to worry about it and think about it, but and as soon as we have more information about what that would look like, we'll share it out. But I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I also did receive a few direct messages as we were talking. One from Sharon, she asked, are the LPC meetings open to the public? If so, is there a schedule posted anywhere? So to answer your question, Sharon, yes, all the LPC meetings are open to the public. For the time being, I think we're going to stick to virtual meetings for LPC. And we do have a tentative list of when our meetings will be held. Typically, or I think we decided that we are going to hold them the first Tuesday of every month from 3 to 5 p.m. And we will get all of those dates posted on the website. But just keep that in mind. And that'll be the first Tuesday of every month.
Second Tuesday.
Second, sorry.
Sorry.
Second.
I wanted to check before I corrected you.
Sorry. Second Tuesday of every month until July. So the next meeting is scheduled for March 8th for your reference. And then I also received a comment, is the rail line part of the boundary? And yes, it is. So that kind of the rail line makes up the eastern part of the DRI boundary, basically from north to south. Okay. Are there any other last minute questions that anyone has? Okay, I did just receive a question. In past DRI award years, was there a benefit to meeting in person, brainstorming amid building owners, etc.? So yes, definitely a benefit to meeting in person for all of the meetings. At this point, I think we're going to remain virtual, and we will reassess that as time moves forward. And then I would also like to mention just brainstorming among building owners. Our team is also conducting stakeholder meetings with groups and organizations and just key stakeholders within the community to understand sort of, on the ground action within downtown Norwich, and maybe what are some of those market polls, or what are the needs and challenges of downtown business owners and property owners. So if you would like to be part of that stakeholder outreach, then we would love to talk to you, and please reach out to me.
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay. How is the LPC made up? I'm not aware. I'm very ignorant at how they're selected or who they're. Is that the county planning committee that's from the community, or is it an IDA Commerce Shenango committee?
Carrie, do you want to take the lead on answering that?
Sure. Hi, Maybe. So the LPC has about 16, 17 members. They were appointed by the state. It's a combination of many of the people who were part of the initial DRI steering committee that put the application together. And then we worked together with the state to identify areas that we needed to fill in. So making sure that we had people from education, from healthcare, the business community, making sure that we had a good representation from everybody. People who have lived here for a long time, younger people, people who are maybe moved to the area recently, to just make sure we really hit on all those points. The committee is co-chaired by myself and Mayor Dolliver, and they were appointed by the state. I think it was official the end of January. And I do know that there's a list of LPC members on the Norwich DRI website. Within the last two presentations that we had for the community, we shared that list.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike H., I see that you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question? maybe it was an accident. Mike, if you still have a question, you have a chance to ask it now. Okay, guess not. All right. All right. Well, if nobody else, can you share a few success stories from previous years? What specific communities have made the transformative outcomes you're looking for? In terms of success stories and communities that have implemented DRI funding, there are quite a few examples. And you know, with so many DRI communities being awarded this funding, I think that they're all in different stages of implementation. For example, one that just comes to top of mind for me, we recently completed the Lockport DRI in Western New York 2 years ago, or 2 rounds ago, I should say. And now they are just getting started on a project that is intended to sort of redevelop the upper story and create a public open space that overlooks the Erie Canal and provide really just an outdoor multi-purpose festival space for the public in a downtown location, and something that we're looking forward to getting working on as well. But Kimberly, I don't know if any other success stories come to mind for you, but I would say that they're all very successful.
Yeah, I would reiterate that, you know, as Sam said, each community is in a different phase of implementation, but all of them are seeing projects advance at this point. But, you know, and all of them are different. They all have a mix of public versus nonprofit versus private sector projects. So they're all very unique. And on the state's website, which is listed up here, on this slide, there are examples of other strategic investment plans and the lists of projects that have been awarded funding in all of the previous 40 DRI communities. So that might be just something that folks want to take a look at and reference and just get a better sense of types of projects that have been awarded throughout the state.
This is Julie Sweet again. Yeah, I'm not sure that the projects that were awarded are posted on there, but certainly the strategic investment plans from previous rounds of DRI. And I encourage you to take a look at that so you know, get a better sense of what those plans look like and what the projects that project types that are included and recommended for funding, and the profiles of those projects that are included in the plan. As far as some of the communities that have really been successful, and there have been many, as Sam and Kimberly mentioned, Oswego up to the north, I think is a fantastic case study. They have pretty much completed all of their projects. I think there's one major one remaining that's in the works, but they have also leveraged a considerable amount of additional private investment, as well as other state and other state funding and other sources. Another part of the Southern Tier region is Watkins Glen, and they also have seen quite a bit of interest in development and in investment from others beyond the DRI investment. And I think, you know, that's you know, certainly one of the main goals that we all have with the program is leveraging that $10 million with additional funding. And we've seen tremendous success in communities being able to do that.
Thank you, Julie. Julie, I don't know if you want to speak to, we got a question about what happens if we don't get $10 million requested in DRI funding.
You mean if you don't submit enough projects worth 10 million?
Correct.
Oh gosh, I've never seen that happen, to be honest with you. You know, we've always had in excess of $10 million. You know, if you submitted a strategic investment plan, which we would do everything to, you know, possible to work with you to ensure that you have projects that you know, exceed that amount that's available. But if you didn't have that, you know, you would be limited to receiving what, you know, what was submitted or less than that, because there could be projects that could be deemed ineligible or not suitable for DRI funding. So we will do everything in our power to work with the LPC and the community to ensure that you have in excess of the 10 million.
And Julie, it's probably worth noting too that that was one of the requirements to even submit an application, and part of the reason why we were awarded, there were criteria. So we showed already that we had projects in the pipeline that were in excess of 10 million, and that's outside of this open call.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I don't think we have any other questions, but if you do think of something as you're putting your head down to sleep tonight, or anything comes up as you're filling out those applications, please feel free to reach out to me at any time, and I'll be happy to walk you through your inquiry. And I would like to just take the time to say thank you for attending this session. Oh, Patsy, I'm sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy question, but I'm wondering how I get together the knowledge for the funding of some of these things. Do I need to go to contractors, different people like that, to get a really good estimate of what I need?
Are you talking about putting together a cost estimate for your
Yeah.
project?
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, it is a tight turnaround to submit projects for the application. However, I would say if you do have a contact that you can make and they can help you put together a preliminary cost estimate, that would be great. But I would say that's sort of where our team can come in together too, to fill in gaps, to help kind of flush out some of those details if it were decided that it were or determined to be an eligible project and pursued by the LPC to continue. That is something that our team can help with once the project is submitted to us, and we can sort of help out flush out some of those details.
So I don't need to have the price for everything, submitting it to you.
Yeah, you don't need to have like definitive costs for everything. I would say it would be great to have a preliminary estimate of costs, but you don't need to have all those specific line items figured out definitively.
Thanks.
Okay, great. So just thank you for attending tonight's session. As always, you can reach out to me if you have any questions, be happy to answer them, and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.